As I mentioned at the end of the last video, with OSPF, we've got basic AD of 110, and that's just it. We have a regular OSPF route, it's got an AD of 110. The route was learned by redistribution, AD is 110. Is it an E1 route? Is it an E2 route? Doesn't matter, as far as the AD goes, that is, because it has an AD of 110. If you don't know what an E1 or an E2 route is, we're going to change that in the OSPF section. My point here is that where with OSPF we have one default administrative distance, with EIGRP we actually have three. First, we have the default AD for internal routes, and that's a route introduced to EIGRP via the network command. And they have an AD of 90. We've seen those before. We're going to see them again in a minute. And a routing table code of D, because E was already in use when EIGRP came along, so they just went back one letter. Now, external routes. Those are introduced to EIGRP via route redistribution. They have an AD of 170 and a routing table code of DEX. Now, I have another separate section of route redistribution scenarios in this course, so we're going to see like one command here in the EIGRP section, so don't think you're getting away with just seeing one command. We have plenty of redistribution elsewhere in the course, but we're going to do some in a moment so I can show you that table. And also a scenario where you might want to change the administrative distance. Because if we want to step away from the defaults once in a while, and we better know how to do that and what might happen when we do. But before we do that, let's talk for a moment about these summary routes, because summary routes in EIGRP, they're the result of manual route summarization. They have an AD of 5. Everybody memorizes those in the CCNA, right? You did, I did, everybody did. 90, 175. But you ask people to show you the AD of 5 for EIGRP summarized routes. It's like, okay, well, let me show you the routing table. Oh, okay, it's not in there. Well, let me show you in this neighbor's routing table. It's not in there either. It's a little bit hidden, so we're going to see that. You're going to see exactly where to see that particular value in this part of the course. But first, we are going to look at those first two route types, internal and external, and also talk about changing your default administrative distance with this network. And this might be the entire network. It might not be. We talked about that in another section, right? You can't always trust network maps. I don't give you tricky network maps, but I am going to tell you in advance there is another adjacency here that I'm not showing you. Routers 2 and 3 also have an adjacency over the Ethernet, and we will verify that in just a moment. But right now, router 1 has a loopback that is not part of EIGRP AS100. And we're going to change in a couple of ways, actually. First off, here are those adjacencies. And you can see first, router 1 has an adjacency to 172.12.123.2. We know that that's the one to router 2. And then router 2 has one right back to 123.1 and also to router 3 at 23.3 via fast Ethernet 0/0. This is why I like using the router number as the last octet and the IP address, because without even looking, or let's say I stepped away for half an hour or a day, however long it takes me to forget, and I come back, I'm like, okay, what's the second adjacency? Who's that to? Well, I know by looking at the addressing that the first one is to router 1, the second one's to router 3. You can't always do that in a production network, certainly, I grant you that, but it's a great lab habit to get into. So now that we have this, let's go ahead and we are going to put that loopback into EIGRP AS100. Nothing to it, there it is. And now we're going to run show IP route EIGRP, and we see exactly what we expect to see. A route to 1110/24. It has the letter D next to it, which indicates an EIGRP internal route, and there is that default AD of 90. So we're all set there. We'll go ahead and ping just to make sure we got connectivity, and we're looking good there. So now let's go back up to router 1, and I'm going to use my up arrow to go through my last couple of commands, and then Control A to move to the front. Long-time viewers, long-time listeners, and first-time callers alike, you know that I'm not real crazy about using every possible shortcut on the keyboard. I'm not much on it. Whatever works for you is great. But I do really like that particular keystroke that moves the cursor to the beginning of the line, and then you just type in no and you're done. So we're going to take that out, and then we're going to introduce that route via route redistribution. Rediscon is how you usually see that. Redistribute connected. And just as a hint, there was one thing I pre-configured. I usually don't do that at all. But since we haven't gone through a route redistribution yet, I wanted to mention that with EIGRP, you need to set a seed metric. And I did that with the default command, the default metric command, before we got started here. And we will demo that in the route redistribution section. So let me show you that one real quick. Default metric is the one that I used. So that's the only command that I pre-used. Let's go down to router 2. And there's the same route, same next hop IP address, same everything, except that AD is now 170. And it's marked DEX because the exact same route was introduced via route redistribution instead of the network command. And we still have connectivity, all is well there. Now let's say here though that on router 2 we wanted to raise we'll raise the admin distance of that route to 200. We'll raise it to 200. Maybe there's another route exactly like this one that has an AD, say, of 180 that someone else set manually, and now you just want to set this one a little bit higher. So we're going to change that AD from 170 to 200 on router 2 with the distance command and its distance EIGRP. So now you'll notice the first value is distance for internal routes. But the only one I want to change is the external route. Well, I still have to set an AD for the internal routes, even if I'm keeping the default. There is no option for just changing the EIGRP AD of internal routes or just the AD of EIGRP external routes. So I will do 90 for that one. And notice that even if I was just changing the internal route AD, I still have to put the external value in. And we're going to move that up to 200. And hallelujah, there are no other options with that. So let's see, I'm going to go in here and check my routing table and just make sure that took effect. And it didn't, and notice right after that I get a couple of neighbors down, and then we get one right back. Well, the change hasn't taken place yet, and notice why these neighbors change. This is what I really like about these commands, the messages you get rather. Because what happens is people tend to concentrate on the first and say, oh, you know, neighbor change and IP version 4, 100, there's the neighbor 172.12.123.1. Obviously important stuff, but to me the best info is right here at the end where it tells you new adjacency, but also here, route configuration changed. I need to get rid of that and highlight it. That's one of those things. There we go. When new stuff comes up on the screen and you're doing that, it can get a little ugly. So there we go. Route configuration changed. Well, what changed? We know it changed. The administrative distance did. So that's a good thing to know, that running this particular command is going to bring your adjacencies down. Now they came back up. The Ethernet segment came up very quickly. And then about 26 seconds after that, we got our other adjacency back. So let's run our command now to take a look at our EIGRP routes. And you'll notice now that AD successfully changed. So I did not have to clear the routing table to make that take effect. EIGRP saw it as a network change, a route configuration change, and said, wait a minute, I'm going to bring the adjacencies down, then bring them back up. Now, just one more thing, though. It's not Columbo. There's one more thing. That didn't, but I'll go with it. What about this AD on router 3? We know that routers 2 and 3 have an adjacency over the Ethernet segment, and that router 3 does not have an adjacency with router 1. So we know the only way for router 3 to find out about this particular route is via router 2. So what is the administrative distance going to be on router 3 for this same route? That's a good practice exam question. If you ask me, it's a good real exam question. They didn't ask me, so they don't let me write those. But what will the AD of this route be on router 3? Let's go find out. Is it going to be 90? Is it going to be 170? Is it going to be 200? Is it going to be something else? Is it going to be there? I guess that's the most important thing to find out. And there it is. It is an external route. And notice the AD is at 170. Very important to remember here. When you use the distance EIGRP command, this is locally significant only. You're only changing the AD on the local router. When router 2 advertises the route to router 3, as you can see, it's going to have an AD of 170. So nothing changes there on the downstream router. The only change you will actually see is on the router where you're using the distance EIGRP command to begin with. So let's go past that, because this is what we're going to look at next, is route summarization, automatic and manual. Because EIGRP has a pesky little default behavior, auto summarization, and that occurs when routes are advertised across classful network boundaries. That doesn't sound bad, but if it's not so bad, why do we almost always, if not always, put in no auto when we're configuring EIGRP? We don't even think about it. We don't even think about what that command is. It's just natural. Router EIGRP 100, next line no auto sum, or just no auto. So there's a really good reason we do that, and we're going to see that in action in a different lab setup in the very next video. I'll go set that up, and I'll meet you back here.